All right, today we're talking about how to prepare your business for sale to maximize its value. My guest today is Don Bielen. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. You know, every week we get smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs, and we twist their arm and get them to come on the show and share a bit of their wisdom for all of you, for your benefit. And if you check out the archives, you'll see we have Netflix, Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, YPO, EO, lots of great episodes for you to check out in there. And before we get into this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses to give to and connect to their dream relationships and partners. How do we do that? We do that by helping you to run your podcast and content marketing. We are the easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do three things: strategy, accountability, and full execution. We like to say that Rise 25 is a team of magic elves that run in the background and make it look easy for a company and the host so they can create amazing content and amazing relationships. In fact, we invented what some are calling the Wix of B2B podcasting, our platform called Podcast Copilot. And we got Don here today. And Don, I know that you put a premium on the importance of relationships. For me, I do the same thing as well. Relationships have led to every advance in my life, personally and professionally. And so I love having the opportunity to do that and to use these conversations in order to forward those relationships and establish new ones like us who have never met before today. So if you ever thought about podcasting, you should do it. Go to rise25.com or you can email us at support@rise25.com. And before we get into today's guests, I have to give a shout out to Adi Clevitt of Business Success Consulting Group and the Systems Simplified podcast. Adi has been such a great friend and advocate. She's been a client for a number of years, and I just love hanging out with her. And she recommended today's guest. And all the best guests have come from other guest recommendations. His name is Don Bielen. He's a principal at Perkins and Co, but he's moving on to something new, a new opportunity, which we're going to talk about in a second. He's also a certified financial planner and certified M&A advisor, mergers and acquisitions advisor. So if you have a company and you are considering maybe selling it one day in the future so you can get value from all that work that you're putting in for your business, well, we're going to be talking about all of that here today. And he's got about 20, 30 years of experience in that area. But Don, such a pleasure to have you here today. And it starts with a family business, a grocery store that your parents ran and you worked in it. And tell me about what that was like. I find sometimes we find people that grow up in a family business and then they just run as far as they can away from that experience. Other times they're like, hey, I like this. I like running my own business. I could see myself doing it. So what was it like for you working in your parents' grocery store growing up?
Well, John, thank you for this opportunity and thank you for the forum and to share some of my background and experience. I've been very blessed when you talk about relationships. Relationships are everything in the business that I currently occupy my time with, but also more importantly, growing up. You mentioned the grocery store. The experience that I think really helped shape my life is the fact that my dad worked for a large corporation for about 20 some years. And he was very entrepreneurial. So he took his retirement plan, all of it, cashed it out and invested in a grocery store in a small town in Montana. I saw that as
Sounds the beginning of like maybe a rom-com or a Netflix movie of the week kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Where we had four children. My dad put everything on the line, bought this grocery store. He had actually been a department manager for this large company.
Were you living in Montana at the time or you moved to Montana?
No, we were born and raised in Montana. I was born in central Montana, and this is northern Montana where we bought this grocery store. So, of course, being part of family of four, our parents expected that we work in the grocery store. So actually starting in sixth grade, I was working full time in the summers, and I learned a lot about work ethic. I learned a lot about business, and that's where the beginning of my education about even like inventory control systems and shipping and finance and business operations and et cetera. We had three different departments in this grocery store. So subsequently, we did well. We had the store for about 4 years, and then my dad wanted to move to another town that was close by, about 40 miles, and expand and do something even better in a nicer town. So we sold that store and bought another store. And I was involved in that store. And my dad, even when I was a freshman in high school, involved me in keeping the books and monitoring revenues and costs and profitability.
A lot of responsibility for a
And
14, 15-year-old.
I was learning a lot. And the thing that you've probably experienced with grocery stores, people in grocery stores are very relationship oriented. They really know their customers. They care about their customers. They're in touch with their customers, and they're very outgoing. And my dad was an inspiration for that because he was extremely customer focused, extremely relationship oriented. And I looked just by pure experience and almost involvement, I was able to glean a lot of his skill set and knowledge and ability to develop relationships.
Mm. Your parents eventually decided that they wanted to consolidate that business and exit, and you were in your early 30s, and they turned to you to help with that. So talk a little bit about how that inspired next chapter for you as well.
Perfect. And leading up to that, John, the second grocery store, unfortunately, was not very successful. And that was a very painful experience for our family where I could watch my dad try to be innovative and creative and restructure maybe our products or services or offerings. And we decided that we needed to consolidate. So we
Why was
consolidated.
getting back, what the other one, it sounded like it was successful. Then he moves to a larger, more prosperous town, and then it's less successful. So looking back on it, why do you think it wasn't successful?
Well, it was a significant investment. It was really placing all the chips on a new, bigger store, larger bakery, larger meat department, larger overall inventory, bigger risk. Well, there was a lot of competition in that marketplace, so we weren't able to accomplish what we thought and steal additional market share. So my dad, I remember talking about that we want to take the elements of the business that are profitable and eliminate the parts that are not. So we started a meat processing company and then a deli, bakery, sandwich shop, which my dad completely built out himself. We bought a shell of a building and built this roughly 20,000 square foot business out of it. So when I was just out of college and I was actually working as a manager in a large Fortune 500 company, and I wanted to go into finance because my college was all focused out of an undergraduate in finance, corporate finance, and I have a minor in economics. And so I've always wanted to be in finance. In fact, when I was younger, I used to read all kinds of money magazines and followed stock portfolios. And I always wanted to be a financial planner, and I wanted to be really with more corporate finance. So after several years in working for a Fortune 500 company, I shifted over to a firm called the Rainier Group. They're based in Seattle. And I was just getting enough experience in the mergers and acquisition area. We specialize in business transition and succession planning. And my mom and dad wanted to retire. So they called me up and I then helped them structure their transaction. It was the first of many transactions that I've done. And it was really an opportunity to understand the human dynamics, the business dynamics, what it was like to be a seller, what it likes to be a buyer. And but you learn a lot of what not to do. And I took away a lot of lessons about things that fail. And unfortunately, that transaction didn't go as well as planned. If I were doing it today, it'd be a very different deal.
Why, looking back on it, what could you have done differently?
Well, in hindsight, my mom and dad were very good at their trade, but they were not good at finance. They didn't understand clearly what the value drivers are in a business. They took for granted the culture that they had created. They took for granted the processes and procedures that they had developed over an extended period of time is something that's transferable with little or no knowledge. So the individual that purchased the business had great skill set, but they had poor business skills, poor operating experience. And from a knowledgeable and educated M&A advisor, you're going to look at the cultural fit, you're going to look at the probability of success and the ability for the buyer to finance the deal, because it was a buyer or a seller finance deal where It's going
So
to
it's
be total.
dependent on payment. So it wasn't a big lump sum upfront payment. It was dependent. So you really needed it to be successful, or else if it's not successful, then those payments will stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where they're the mistake that many individuals make. They think, well, I have this big tax liability if I sell my business. So therefore, one way to defer taxes is to take a deferred installment sale on my business. Well, the seller is taking on significant risk because they're now dependent upon that new operator to run and operate the business, to both pay for the operations as well as fund the purchase of the ownership. And that was the problem. Fortunately, and also the other thing that I learned from that is that my mom and dad undersold it. They didn't really realize how to value a business. And
Mm,
looking at the different types of valuation methods, what
yeah.
it is to a strategic versus a financial. This is a pure financial buyer. So the value that you're going to realize is
Yeah.
significantly less than a strategic.
So
So
after this experience, you actually go into strategic advisory services, I guess is what it's called, M&A advisory. And is that right?
it's called M&A advisory. There's a small distinction between investment banking and M&A advisory. Investment banking typically is doing everything from larger sell side or buy side transaction capital raises, mergers and acquisitions, corporate restructuring, those things. Where M&A advisory is going to be focused on the market of enterprise value from roughly 5 million to 50 million. And then you're helping to position the business for the sale, determine the valuation, determine the business owner's financial requirements, determine the potential buyer's pool, look at the potential offers that come in on the table, evaluate the buyers relative to the sellers, look at the match and the ability for the individuals to finance the deal. So we're going to be more, I guess, comprehensive, but more focused on these middle market businesses.
Okay. And tell us about this specialty raw pet food company that
Oh,
you witnessed.
yeah, that was several years ago, John, when in my earlier days, we were approached to help sell this pet food company. So, of course, the first step is to understand the history. Well, this company had previously taken the company to market by using a broker out of the Seattle marketplace. And I was very skeptical about that broker because the individual was more concerned about cost and they wanted to try to maximize the enterprise value, but they had little knowledge about the difference between a business broker and an M&A advisor. So they chose to take the shortcut approach and hired this business broker. Well, the business broker was not very sophisticated. And so the
And
mistakes that,
when you say cost from the seller's perspective, is an M&A advisor charging you as your ongoing, like as a fee for services kind of thing, and the business broker is more of a contingency model where they get paid on success? And is that how it affects the seller's cost?
yeah, I guess the market comparison is you would almost, and no disrespect to business brokers, but business brokers oftentimes are very similar to a real estate agent.
They get a
So
commission if the
So it's going to be
transaction goes
based on
through.
the
Yeah.
transaction.
Okay.
And so they're going to be marketing this as a commodity where
Yeah.
there's not a lot of work and diligence is done to really discover the potential of the business based on its history. What is the potential revenues? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the products and the services of the people? There's always people, products, and price. So you look at those things, and so an M&A advisor is going to be a more sophisticated representation, and we will typically charge more. Typically, we'll have a retainer because we're going to work with the business owner
Yeah.
as we prepare the business and realize that it's really analogous to taking a house to the marketplace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe the business broker, the real estate agent, they're going to be more inclined to get that commission, and the more
Right.
transactions they could close in a shorter period of time, the more money they make,
So
as
this for
opposed
this
to
for this pet food company, they hire this business broker, but a bunch of things went wrong in the process. Can you take us through those?
yeah, they made a couple of critical errors because they didn't do their homework. Number one is there's basically two types of buyers in the market. There's a financial buyer and strategic buyer, and there's a whole bunch of kind of subcategories under each of those buying types. So they found a strategic buyer out of Florida. This company was based in the Northwest. And the company was expanding and doing extremely well. Profits were growing 10, 20% per year, et cetera. So they got involved. And then when they got into the due diligence process, of course, the first step that you need to take is signing a non-disclosure agreement. Well, the purchaser and their legal counsel changed the NDA to eliminate any sort of restrictions on copyrights or patents. And the seller, the business broker, did not pick up the fact that the NDA was changed.
Oh,
So they get further on into the deal, and they couldn't come to terms on price and deal structure. So I'm actually advising the client tangentially on the side from their personal financial, because they didn't engage us. So I was helping them. I knew them relatively well, and I knew the business. And so subsequently, after the deal went sideways, the acquirer took the brand, took a lot of the copyright materials, took the recipes, and was even using their logo with their products. And this company was completely decimated.
wow.
And so they went from making their EBITDA was right around $2 million shortly thereafter. And the FDA come in, and they did a sample on the pet food, and the pet food had a small amount of E. coli in it and wound up shutting down the company. So the company went from one day anticipating probably a $20 million payoff, looking at a house on the Oregon coast, to completely near bankruptcy and their liquidation.
Brutal.
Bad day.
Yeah. So your experience of going through and kind of witnessing this while you're their personal financial planner, but not involved in the business transaction, was what inspired you. And you said there's got to be a better way to do this.
Absolutely. And I'd seen several other businesses that were very poorly represented, where I look at the background and the pedigree and the experience of the business broker. I mean, they're not coming to the table with MBAs. They're not coming to the table with M&A certifications. They don't have necessarily deep finance backgrounds. They haven't been in operating businesses for an extended period of time. Oftentimes you say, well, they've been a business broker, but they also previously were maybe a business owner, or a teacher, or something. That was now a default career. So I had started working with a firm out of Seattle, and I took a close look at their process, and I thought, you're basically taking an investment banking process and plugging it into a business broker model. So you're good. And so I said, okay, there's a opportunity in this marketplace where so many of these small businesses, let's say 1 million to $5 million of earnings, are so underrepresented. They're not getting the level of sophistication and representation and the marketing capacity that they need to truly maximize value. Because I struggle with that term, even maximize value, because anybody that sold their business, they realize that they're not going to get a big check. Price is only 1/10 of the equation. What we need to look at deal structure, what you call cap structure. So that can include bank financing, seller financing. It might include what you call equity rollover, which is rolling some of your company value into the new company that's acquiring you. We can look at earnouts. We can look at holdbacks. All of that is kind of added up to get the total enterprise value. But there's allocation between all of those categories of the business value. So, I mean, I was dealing with it was a large equipment manufacturer out of Austin, Texas. They wanted to be acquired by one of their major competitors. So they came to me initially and I said, well, what do you think this business is worth? What is your target? They said, well, we think it's worth about 20, maybe 22 million. So we did an analysis. I said, I think you're in the low $30 million range. Well, so when we got involved with them, the acquirer wanted to do a significant portion of their sale proceeds in an earnout. What it means is that if a company has high growth, then you get a percentage of that future growth. So an individual says, well, I'm willing to take 20 million, but if I can participate in the future growth of this business and maybe take another 20 million and even do better total net sale proceeds, I'll do that. But we need to understand both businesses. We need to understand the selling business. We need to understand the buying business. and the likelihood of the probability that we're going to realize those revenues. So we were very careful in structuring those kind of things. So the key takeaway there is price is not all, everything. Price is only 1/10 of the component.
So you make a compelling argument for that, but I'm curious, when you're working with a client that is a seller and there's a lot of emotions involved, and maybe they've been running this business for 20 or 30 years and they've never done an M&A transaction before or rarely been involved in them. Is that hard to convey that and to get the clients to understand that price is just 1/10 of the formula when we all understand the price of eggs, we all understand the price of milk. It's the thing that most people look at.
That's where we are going to spend some time on the front end, John, with the individual to help them understand what a typical transaction looks like. Because the other key component you touch on a little bit is the emotion. Many business owners, this is well understood by most individuals, but many business owners have a strong emotional tie because in essence, they've started this from scratch. So it's almost like raising a child. So they've moved it from infancy into maturity, into late maturity. And they have a lot of vested interests. It's an expression of their identity. It's a reflection of their relationships. It's very near and dear to them. So part of it, in order for an individual to go someplace, to leave one destination to go someplace, you need to know what that destination looked like. So we will oftentimes spend time and do the financial analysis and determine, here's the proceeds. What do you want to do with the next chapter of your life? What's that look like? And it's going to be much easier for the individual. I had another company. It was a big fuel distribution company. Sale was about $40 million. We transitioned it down to the son. Well, the son is looking at it. He said, this is a third generation family business. And I don't know if I sell this, Don, what am I going to do? And I said, well, if you sell this, you're going to have about $30 million net sale proceeds. You have all this commercial real estate. And you can do all the hunting and fishing that you've always wanted to do all your life that you've never done. You could completely travel the world. You want to invest in commercial real estate. So basically what we do is create a very clear vision and purpose for the individuals and redefining their purpose in something that's gratifying, and something that's motivating, something that really is enriching. So that's where we have to deal with the mental component.
Yeah.
And another part of that
is there a way to can you assess how much of the puzzle, so to speak, is the emotional or psychological component versus deal structure and making sure that works? And it probably varies for every deal.
It's interesting because you've heard this before when individuals say, well, my business is not for sale, but there's always a price. So depending on the price. So maybe to your question in terms of maybe delineating between the emotional component and the financial is really looking at all the related components. What does this transaction mean to my employees? What does this transaction mean to my family? What's it mean to my spouse? What does it mean to my community? And looking at it very holistically. But then also is what is the future of the business? This particular business, it's with a fuel distribution business and global warming or climate change. And then local regulations, they thought this might be the peak of the business. And so if we wait and continue to do this, then the net sale proceeds, no matter what you do downstream, if you have a declining business, are not even near that. And you have to work extra hard to get through that very difficult period of decline. So it's really having a lot of very soulful, in-depth, relationship-based conversations. To understand what motivates them. Sometimes what we'll even do is what you call a cultural index. A cultural index is about a 10x modification of a Myers-Briggs personality profile. So it's going to give you an idea of their strengths, their tendencies, their dominant characteristics, their decision.
Are you talking about the seller here, or are you talking about the buyer? Who are you talking about?
I typically talk about the seller.
Okay.
So I'm trying to understand both from a personal and financial and back to relationships is what's going to drive this individual. Because what we don't want to do, let's say for instance, one individual says, I want $20 million from this transaction cash. I never want to work a day in my life. That's a very different deal than if I'm going to a strategic buyer and say, okay, what I want to do, I want to sell my business. I'm going to participate in the future, but also I want to work in the business. I want to continue to run this division of the company. And I'm
Yeah.
going to have a meaningful now because I have strategic partners with a much bigger bank account.
Yeah.
So it really, you have to customize the transaction to fit the individuals.
Tell us about, there was a mental health drug treatment company that had 5 different locations that you also worked on. Tell us that story.
Yeah, that was had actually been introduced through a close friend of mine for this company, and they'd recently reached out to a valuation company. And the valuation company, typically, a lot of valuations are done for estate tax planning purposes. They might be done to get an idea for bank leveraging or bank lending, et cetera, but they typically don't represent what's done in the market. So that's a common mistake that business owners think, if I'm going to take my business to market, I need to go to a business appraiser to give me an idea. Well, that doesn't take into consideration current transactions in the industry. It doesn't really take into consideration the inherent risk in the business. Tell me about your infrastructure. Tell me about your management team. Tell me about your customer base. Tell me about your growth rate, all those things. So they had a business valuation. The business valuation came at about $4 million. And the individual says, well, I can't exit for that. So therefore, I'm not going to go to market. So our approach is say, let's take a look at the market. What's happening in the market? Well, we found that there's significant roll-ups. So a roll-up is
Yeah.
really an aggregation of companies that are very like similar market, similar territory, similar service, similar operating process procedures. So we saw that this roll-up was happening in Southern California. So we contacted them, and rather than pay a 2 or 3 times earnings multiple, they're paying like a 6 to 8 times earnings multiple. And all of a sudden, we're looking at, rather than a $4 million company, we're looking at a $12 million company.
Mm.
Now the seller's interested. He's tired of the operations. He's tired of working long hours. And he also is just kind of burned out at second generation. So all of a sudden now we have a completely different dynamic. So we're now talking with strategics, and we know how strategics think. They've bought and sold 5, 6 of these operations already. So they're skilled. They already have an investment banking team. They have the valuation model down. They have the finance. They have the deal structure. And that's where the seller is a huge disadvantage if they don't have representation, because it's the amateurs playing with the pros, and they're destined to be taken advantage of, which is so common, which happened right now with private equity. Private equity oftentimes they're coming in because they need a return on investment of 25, 30%. And so in order to do that, you have to change the business in many cases dramatically to get to that result. But anyway, back to this mental health company. So we were able to structure the deal, but one of the biggest challenges, because the roll-up, because there's always finite capital. So they had originally proposed 30% of the sale price would be the equity in the acquiring company. And we felt that was just too much because there's too much risk. I evaluated, and we spent a lot of time evaluating their management team, evaluating their history, evaluating their success records, looking at their financials, et cetera. So we had to take a hard look at this acquirer and say, do we want to be part of this team going forward?
Because you're placing a bet. Yeah, for the seller, you're placing a bet on whether this is going to pay off or not.
This is about $4 million.
Yeah.
And so we said, okay, we're going to have these conditions because we need to have an employment agreement. We need to have influence over the business going forward. We need to get financial reports. We need to get, give me an idea of what the other acquirers have, the other companies that you acquired, what their experiences have been, et cetera. So we need to make sure we know what's going into, what kind of, basically, lack of better words, who we're getting in bed with.
Yeah.
And so we finally determined that we're going to do a 20% rollover in equity, and the business owner wanted to stay involved. Unfortunately, can hand off all the headaches and the stuff that he didn't like, and stayed and kept doing the things that he did like. And so we're continuing to monitor the performance of that business, because there will be this proverbial second bite of the apple, because they're anticipating a liquidity event, selling of the entire franchise of probably 40 different operations in about 4 years. So we think that we're going to have probably a 10 to 12 earnings multiple, and we sold for roughly 7 of earnings multiple.
So they end up do they often make more on the second bite or equivalent amount? I guess it depends on how much they hold back.
Oftentimes, I tell another example, but in this particular case, since we only rolled 20%, we're probably still going to double our money on that $4 million
Hmm.
over that 4 years. Another one we did this. It's more of a vendor vetting monitoring system. They did vendor vetting for Google, for Amazon, for Facebook, et cetera. So the initial deal was 80 million. We did a 30% rollover equity. They had a subsequent deal where they took it private. The original 80 million, he made 120 million on the subsequent 30% rollover.
So all right, if am I doing my math correctly? So 30% of 80 million, so 24 million, and he
Oh,
made 100.
well, no, yeah, the 80 million is the cash he took off the table. So
Okay.
that was for 70% of the company.
Okay, so he held back then
He
20
held back
million or
30.
something?
Yeah,
30
held
million.
back
Okay. Okay.
at that time. It was roughly about, yeah, almost 30 million
And that
and
30
wind
went
up.
to 120?
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow.
And it was
Amazing.
taken in a public company. So he had public company stock and it had
Mm.
complete diversification. It was a huge home run.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. I want to know, and maybe this is the secret sauce that you can't reveal, but it, and maybe it's because I'm a little bit ignorant to this industry, but we gave the comparison of real estate, and in real estate you have the MLS, the multiple listing service, where all the homes are listed, but then there's pocket listings, there's secret listings. How do you find out about all this stuff? Like, is there a public database, or is it just having your ear to the ground about what's going on in the industry? And if
Mm.
so, how do you know about all these different industries and what roll-ups are happening?
There are tremendous amount of resources. The classic is PitchBook. It's an expensive service. You pay about $30,000. There's three or four others that are very similar. PitchBook, I think, is one of the best in the marketplace. So you have to buy these subscriptions to all these data services. Of
Mm,
course, there's Dun and Bradstreet, et cetera. But also it is being knowledgeable of what's happening in that marketplace in that industry. And so I have relationships with a number of investment bankers across the country that have specialized, which called verticals.
got it. Okay.
Specialization, the one I just spoke with earlier today, they're going to be specializing in manufacturing. Then you get even deeper. What kind of manufacturing? Another one that specializes in aerospace. We'll be representing an aerospace company at some point in the future. Um, then that's where sometimes I will partner with those individuals that have very deep penetration into the particular vertical. Like for one other example, it's a modular home manufacturing company. Well, we find out they were approached by a large strategic that owns about 20 other companies that size that were approaching to be purchased. Well, we find out they're going to be doing the roll up. So oftentimes clients that have well-oiled operating businesses that are very profitable and very even public or well-known are going to be approached by these organizations, by these companies that are looking to continue to expand. But that's another classic example where they're pros. They have the model, they have the valuation, they have the operating procedures, everything, and they're coming in and swooping up these little businesses, and the businesses then they're so excited because somebody loves my business. I've been approached. It must be so valuable, et cetera. What they don't realize is that same acquirer spoke with all of their competitors. They're trying to
Mm,
find the best deal out there.
hmm.
So it's you have to take a step back and say, how ready is this business for sale? Do they
Mm,
have GAAP financials? Have they potentially done a quality of earnings review? Do they have audited financial statements? What do they have for customer concentration? What do they have? What's their supply chain look like? Tell me about the age of your workforce. Tell me about the age of your operating equipment. What are future capital expenditure requirements? So you have to really dissect the business and break it
mm,
down into well over 100 components to
mm.
get an idea. What is the health and welfare of this business? What is its potential? What are its vulnerabilities? And then what is this truly worth to that acquirer? Because
Yeah.
usually the strategics, one reason why they pay more is because you have a lot of synergies. You're going to cut out accounting. You're going to cut out human resource. You're going to cut out some C-suite level individuals. You're going to maybe have improved training, better process, better software systems, better distribution channels, better market or bidding power buying power within the marketplace, better pricing for their products, et cetera. So it's definitely not apples and oranges.
I'm mindful of the clock here, and I want to ask about you are actually moving into a new chapter. You are joining a VC PE firm based out of Boise, which I don't hear that very often. Usually VC and PE, venture capital and private equity, are very different types of entities. So tell me a little bit about this interesting structure.
Yeah, it's a true success story. Two individuals that are born and raised in the Boise marketplace, second generation. One's a second generation business owner. They're extremely well connected in the marketplace, very highly respected, very professional, very knowledgeable. So they found an opportunity to raise capital from just a pure private equity and invest in some of these smaller startups, and had some big home runs. So being able to be extremely knowledgeable and evaluating the inherent potential within a business for its future, then that's also part of it is the venture capital component. So believe it or not, they do go relatively well. A similar mindset that in terms of evaluating the business model, evaluating the potential for growth and opportunity, maybe what the public market looks like. I attended a couple of what's called founders events. So the company is called Capital 11. Mm-hmm. Capital 11 owns well over interest in about 60 some companies. Mm-hmm. They just closed a private equity fund of about $27 million, which is relatively small compared to the marketplace, but just showing a great track record and being able to have enough just strength and foundational principles within the business to continue to grow that. Well, understanding that if you own interest in 60 companies, there's going to be a number of transactions in the future. Mm-hmm. So we all looked at each other and said, let's kind of formalize our mergers and acquisition advisory services. And so we can take these businesses to their full life cycle, from beginning, financing, growth, to maturity, to liquidity event. So it completes the business cycle for these business owners.
Well, Don, this has been great. Let me wrap up with my last question, which is my gratitude question. I'm a big fan of practicing gratitude and also giving our guests a little bit of space at the end here to acknowledge and thank anyone who, especially peers or contemporaries who've been there with them in their journey. Anyone in particular you'd like to shout out and thank?
Well, I mentioned my dad and mother. I really was influenced by their entrepreneurial spirit and propensity for risk. So that's one big one. But another individual that owns a company out of the Southern California, it's a plumbing distribution company, probably several $100 million. This individual, when I got to know him, told me his story that he started in Sudan as a very poor traveling individual that was trying to basically sell produce in his like 15, in his early teens. Well, it turns out that he was very generous and very giving to other individuals, and was always cared more for other individuals than he did for himself. So I admired his kind of investment in the future. I admired the fact that he understood karma, that he was always more focused on even taking care of individuals that are less fortunate than himself. And he grew a multi-$100 million empire. So sitting in his $15 million house in Southern California, telling this story, how he started with completely nothing and how he is able to create something that's just amazing company, amazing people. And actually about 80% of his estate is going to go to his church.
Wow.
And where so many instances where at one point he mentioned that he was in a hospital bed a couple of years ago and he was given his last rites. And just because of one individual that he helped previously, they identified a treatment down in South America, brought that treatment up and saved his life and completely gave him a second lease on life.
Wow.
And I look at that and I'm thinking, this is an inspiration of what really good people are, what they can do. So it's just focus, it's hard work, and being very altruistic with yourself, and a lot of self-actualization. He knows himself very, very well. And he's one of the most admired people I've ever met, and a complete inspiration.
What a story. Don, such a pleasure here. Where can people go to learn more about you and Capital 11 and your next chapter?
Well, to go to the capital11.com website. We're in the process, because we're formalizing this service offering, of standing up that additional web page. But there's a lot of information about Capital 11. Of course, my LinkedIn is available, Don Bielen, Bielen. Look me up at LinkedIn. There will be announcements. And you can find a lot more about my background. And the last 30 years with working with closely held businesses across the United States has been extremely gratifying. It's helped shape me and position me to where I'm today, to take it to the next level.
Don, thanks so much for your time.
Okay, thanks, John.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.